The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and welcome to another 1615 webinar. I'm Matthew Ellison, the president at 1615. Today's webinar is our final installment in a three-part series for churches that send direct. Today we'll be talking about an incredibly important and relevant topic, building a missionary crisis management team. Today's subject matter expert is Jeff Jackson. He's not only a good friend of mine, but he serves as the Director of Church Relations and Missionary Care at Shepherd Staff Missions Facilitators. He's also the ministry's founder, and he travels extensively today with Shepherd Staff serving churches across the country. What happens when a crisis engulfs a missionary that has been sent directly to the field by their own church rather than through a long-established missionary agency? In this session, we're going to be covering a very important topic. We will demonstrate the importance of local churches developing a crisis management policy that fits the specific needs of their own missionaries. Key aspects of what the policy should contain will be discussed, along with some practical steps that could be taken to establish a crisis management team to implement the policy both before, during, and after a potential crisis event. Shepherd Staff exists to serve and empower local churches in their efforts to send and care for their own members who have been called to serve as missionaries in countries outside the United States. In just a moment, I'm going to be handing the controls over to Jeff, but just a few things before we get started. Your phones are muted to preserve sound quality. You can listen through your computer speakers or you can call in on the telephone. As questions come to mind today during Jeff's session, please type them in the question and answer panel located in the GoToWebinar task panel on the upper right-hand side of your screen. We will be addressing your questions for the last 15 to 20 minutes of our time together. 50 people have registered for today's live webinar. I want to remind you that this webinar is also being recorded and will be available for download at 1615.org in the next couple of weeks. Once again, that's 1615.org. Jeff, I want to thank you again for being with us for this three-part series. I want to thank the live audience. And Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you now. It's all yours.
Thank you, Matt, and welcome to all of you that are tuning in for this webinar. And if you've been here for all three, I really appreciate your commitment to hear the things that we're trying to pass on to help churches that have made that decision to send their own people directly to the field. Today's subject is it's a big subject, much larger than what can be covered in the amount of time that we have here. And in a sense, what I'm about to share with you is cutting new ground. And we'll go over some of that as we go along. But I want you to keep in mind that the whole idea of local churches sending their own direct to the field is a somewhat new idea for many churches and many denominations. And the idea that because of the danger that now exists in many parts of the world, the need for a local church to have a crisis management policy is incredibly important. And so much of what I'm going to share with you in this webinar are principles and truths derived from many of the traditional missions agencies that have done this for years and have developed policies that they navigate by, and then we've sort of shaped and molded them to fit within a local church context. And so beginning with this first slide, let me just go over with all of you the purpose of this webinar. Number one, I want to describe for you the need and the value of a church-based crisis management policy and team. I also want to provide an overview of the key components that should be included in a crisis management policy. I want to also describe and define some of the essential roles that a crisis management team needs to have as part of its makeup. And then finally, a couple of key principles I want to lay out for you that will help maybe provide some first steps for you to take if you want to move forward into this area. And let's go ahead and move forward with this now. So why is a crisis management policy or crisis management team needed? Well, number one, and I know this is not news to anybody that's listening, but missionaries face all of the same risks and dangers that every person living in the U.S. does, but many others also. And there's lots of reasons that contribute to that. But the reality of it is that in many ways, taking the gospel to the nations and living in countries outside of your own comes at a greater cost and a greater risk than it has at many times in the past. And so because missionaries face these, in a sense, increased risks and dangers, the churches that send these folks and love them need to be prepared for something going wrong. And as point number 2 makes, it really isn't a matter of if a crisis event or emergency takes place, but a matter of when. At some point, that call is going to come, that email, that communication, that somebody that you've sent to the field is in the midst of a major crisis or some event has happened to them. And then finally, as far as why a crisis management policy and team is needed, I mean, this is kind of one of those no-brainer kind of statements, but I want to make it anyway. Common sense and experience teaches that when a missionary-related crisis event or emergency takes place, having a predetermined policy and team to implement that policy will help to minimize the impact of whatever has taken place. In fact, in the local town where I live here in Southern California, just a couple days ago, my daughter works for the police department, and they had a major crisis event training that involved the local sheriffs, the police, the fire department. There was a major incident that was simulated, and they do all of these things to be prepared for when the event actually happens. Not if the event's going to happen, but when the event's going to happen. And if that's true in so many areas of our lives here in the States, that preparation is essential for lessening the impact, how much more is it when we send our own people out to serve in other countries around the world? So those are some of the reasons why this type of structure is necessary within a local church that sends their own. Now let me talk about some of the key components of a church-based crisis management policy. Okay, so we're going to specifically look at the policy at this point in time. Every policy, no matter what it's a policy for, needs to include at its beginning a description of the purpose of the policy. And in this case, the purpose of this policy within the overall ministry of the church. And I've given you sort of a brief example here of what this statement should look like or might look like for a local church. And so it might be something that says this policy is designed to manage the church's response to a crisis event or emergency that has impacted one of our missionaries from this church that is serving in a country outside of the United States at the time the event takes place. So a clear statement of the purpose of the policy right up front is crucial so that anybody that looks at it knows, A, this group of people, this church has thought this through. It's important enough to them that they've come together and they've mapped out how to navigate this crisis, so it sends a signal that builds confidence in the members of the church and the family members of the missionary. It instills confidence that this church knows what they're doing and has thought things through. And then it also provides a roadmap for everyone to follow so that when decisions are made, and those decisions are made according to the policy, that nobody's caught by surprise. In other words, because we've thought about it, because we have it written down, this is the foundation of the decision that we just made, or we're going to need to make if this or that happens. So it's also important that the policy contain a definition of what a crisis is, so that within the policy there's a definition of what a crisis is. For example, a crisis, according to this policy, is a potential or actual event that is likely to impact or has already impacted the personal safety of the church's missionary and immediate family members on the field. Now, the key concept there is that the policy defines a crisis as a potential or actual event. Now, there are some crisis events that are able to be seen before they come. For example, that major hurricane that hit Mexico last week. If it would have wreaked the kind of havoc that people were expecting, It was a crisis event that could have been known ahead of time, and this policy should govern how the church would respond to their missionaries that are in the way of that major hurricane. And if you haven't seen some of the comments about that, it was an amazing testimony to the government of Mexico that with the size of that storm, nobody actually died as a result of the storm, as far as they know, up to this point in time. So defining the crisis within the policy is absolutely essential. Now, a couple other key components. It should also contain a clear declaration that all aspects of the church's response to a missionary-related crisis will be managed by the crisis management team, and we'll talk about that, and in accordance with the crisis management policy of this church. You don't want to leave any stone unturned when writing a policy in this level. So again, it may seem like a kind of redundant, but to make clear that the crisis management team is going to navigate according to the crisis management policy, and that the church, as much as is possible, understands that that team is going to navigate according to the policy. That's very important. Also, a description of the responsibility and authority that the church leadership imparts to the crisis management team director. All right, now we're going to talk more specifically about the crisis management team director, and I'll describe who that should be and definitely who that shouldn't be in just a minute. But for this point, what I want you to understand is that the responsibility and authority that the church leadership imparts to the crisis management team director should be very clearly spelled out in the policy. You can't overlook this. This is absolutely essential. And as if you've been in business, you've worked in the real world, you've been in positions of leadership, you know, one of the major disasters of leadership is to give somebody responsibility to do something and not give them the authority to do it, or not make clear what their authority is to actually fulfill that responsibility. So this policy needs to not only declare what the crisis management team director's responsibilities are, but also the authority that he has. And that's going to kind of blow your mind in a minute when I talk about what that is. And finally, a declaration of the minimal number of crisis management team members and a summary of the area of responsibility of each team member. So the policy should also lay out the key components of the team, the people that are going to fill specific roles, and we'll talk about some of those in just a few minutes. So with that, let's see here. Here we go. Let me hit a couple more key components. And this one, I'm going to have to explain this a little bit, but it's absolutely crucial to understand. There needs to be a declaration in the crisis management policy that the following church members are not, capital N, capital O, capital T, are not permitted to serve on the crisis management. First and foremost, the senior pastor cannot serve on the team. His role in the church is too crucial. The responsibilities he bears, the role that he has in people's lives is too significant. And if decisions are made that are difficult decisions that can be questioned at a later point in time or turn out disastrous, the senior pastor shouldn't be left holding the bag. So no senior pastor should ever be part of the crisis management team of the church that he pastors. Also, there should not be any members of the family or of any of the missionaries from the church. In other words, no matter how, if you've got a missionary that's out on the field and this guy's dad is a cop, or he's part of the federal emergency response arm of the government, no matter what it is, you don't want family members of the missionary, either the missionary man or the woman or whatever. No family members can serve on the team. For obvious reasons, there's a need for objectivity. There's a need for being able to make decisions that that undue pressure from being a family member might cloud those good decisions. And finally, and this one is not as rigid as the first two, but other pastoral staff on the church should not serve in any role on the team other than the prayer or pastoral care provider role, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So in other words, you don't want a pastoral staff member serving in any other capacity on the team other than the prayer or pastoral care provider role, because again, some of the decisions that they're going to have to make if they're in those other decision-making positions may actually impact their salary. It could impact the health of the church. It has a ripple effect in a number of different areas that could just definitely create more problems than it solves. So those are a few more key components of a church-based crisis management policy. Now let me talk about the team members. And the first and obviously the most important member of the crisis management team is the director. And the crisis management team director should be appointed by the churches. Obviously the pastor is going to be involved, especially the senior pastor should be involved with this. But this person needs to be appointed by the church's board of directors. And as I emphasized earlier, the crisis management team director should not be one of the pastoral staff of the church. Now here's where I need to unpack this very clearly. A couple things to keep in mind about the crisis management team director that the church's board of directors selects. First, this person has to have the board authorized authority to make all financial and legally binding crisis-related decisions on behalf of the church. In other words, this person has already been given authority by the board of the church to make all financial and legally binding crisis-related decisions on behalf of the church. He's been given a stewardship, and he is going to act as if he does have a stewardship, but he has the authority to do these kind of things. Secondly, and I'll unpack that a little bit more with the next point after this. Secondly, the crisis management team director, one of his primary responsibilities is when a crisis event happens to call the pre-selected crisis management team into action. So, obviously a crisis management team doesn't need to meet regularly when there is no crisis. It's good to meet, perhaps on a biannual basis or once a year, but actually the team is thrust into action when the event is imminent or the event has already happened, and it's the crisis management team director that calls the team together and puts them into action. And finally, the crisis management team director monitors all aspects of the crisis response and has final decision-making authority, okay? And what that means is that, if he's listening to input from different team members, he's paying attention to what's going on in the ultimately, the buck stops with him, and he makes the final shot on what the church's response is going to be, and the board has pre-authorized him to do that. Now, a couple of examples of what this would look like would be, for example, in the midst of the crisis management team director has to feel free to say, hey, we need to evacuate our missionaries, and I'm going to commit $10,000 to do that. Get out of that country in whatever way you can, and he has the responsibility and the authority to basically commit the church to whatever it costs financially to evacuate the missionary to some safer country nearby, or even remove them from the country, or get them into some other place that's safe. He has been given the board-approved authority to commit funds from the church in the midst of the crisis, and he knows that. And he doesn't have to go back and get approval for each decision that he needs to make. Okay, so this is a crucial component of this. Also, and we'll talk about this a little later too, but he needs to be able to, if necessary, if there's a hostage type incident involved or taking place, he needs to have the freedom to hire a hostage negotiator. And there are ministries that do specific hostage negotiation for Christian missionaries. Well, the crisis management team director has to have the freedom if he feels it's necessary, to commit the church financially to hire a hostage negotiator for the incident that's taking place. So I can't overemphasize the reality that this crisis management team director, the buck stops with him in the crisis and the response of the church to the crisis, and all the authority he needs to make the decisions that he needs to make and commit church finances or resources for the crisis. He's already been given approval to do that, and the church leadership and board will stand behind him regardless of the decisions that he makes. Okay? So very, very important truths. Next, I want to go over now the basically the other team members that make up the team. And every crisis management team, now I've got them listed here with the director and these 7. This is an 8-person team. Now, an 8-person team is not absolutely essential. Some of these roles can be done by one person, but generally speaking, a crisis management team needs to have at least a director and 4 members. And I'll kind of link the two together that can fit under one person's hat as we go along. So in addition to the crisis management team director, there needs to be one of the team members that's the recorder or the secretary for all crises that the team actually manages. In other words, you got to have somebody that's in on the crisis management team meetings, that's taking notes, that's recording what's taking place, because there's a lot to be learned from this downstream. There may be decisions that were made right now, and at the moment, with all the facts that were discussed at the meeting, this decision looked like the right decision, but then it turns out it wasn't. And now you've got a record of why at that moment that decision looked like the right decision. And it will help to clarify things further downstream. So you've got to have a recorder or a secretary, and only one person should, in a sense, should wear that hat. Okay. Now, you also need a team member to coordinate the meetings, to be sort of a meeting facilitator and logistics person. And basically what that means is that this person, in the midst of a crisis, everybody's minds are focused. They're zeroed in on their specific role. Well, this person, he's thinking about, hey, where's the team going to meet? If they're going to be there hours at a time, are there snacks that are needed there? Do we need to bring meals in? Is there a better location to meet in because of the press or whatever, or family members? Is there a better place to meet rather than the church? And so the facilitator, the logistics person, plays an absolutely crucial role. And again, all of these roles serve under the direction of the crisis management team director. And I'll link that person to another person downstream so that one person can hold that role and another role. The third one that I've got listed there is a government liaison. Now, whether you like it or not, or whether we seek it or not, in a crisis event for missionaries, there's going to be governmental involvement. It could be the FBI, it could be the State Department, it could be a number of different governmental agencies, both at the federal level, the state level, even the local level. And so the crisis management team needs a government liaison. And this person's responsibility is to interact and be the only interface of the church and of the team with any governmental representative. And so that person needs to have, obviously this kind of person needs to have the ability to communicate clearly, can represent himself well and the church well in his discussions with government people. But basically, any interaction that the church and the crisis management team has with any governmental agency, it's got to be the government liaison. And the actual content of what he communicates to government officials is going to come at the direction of the crisis management team director. There needs to also be a media spokesman. Believe it or not, and I mean, obviously, it's not a no aha moment for most of you, but the media is going to be all over it. With social media the way it is, the way things are telecommunications-wise these days, there's going to be reporters or other bloggers or other people that want inside scoops on what's taking place. And so the crisis management team, well, the church leadership, all the church, and especially the crisis management team, everybody needs to understand there's only one person that speaks to the media, and that's our media spokesman, okay? And that media spokesman, I'm going to talk a little bit more about something to remember if you're serving in the role of media spokesman. I'll get to that in a couple minutes, but there are some limitations intentionally on information that the media spokesman has access to, that when he does speak to the media, he's in a sense, he's as scripted as possible, and he's only going to release the information that the crisis management team believes is necessary for the media to know. And then finally, well, not finally, but the next is a family liaison. This is somebody who's going to represent the team to the family, and not only the immediate family, but the extended family. Somebody that can, in a sense, provide information about decisions the team is making to the family prior to those things being released to the media or the government. So this family liaison is somebody who is in a sense, as decisions ripple outward from the crisis management team, the first people that should feel the ripple should be family members. And of course, what they're going to hear is going to be limited to what they need to hear, but they're going to hear first, even before the media or the government, about what's taking place in the crisis. So you need somebody that's a family liaison. Also, I talked about this earlier, you need a prayer and pastoral care provider. Somebody may be a really good family liaison, but actually not be in the role of a pastor or even have, in a sense, pastoral gifts. But you also want somebody on the team, and this could be a staff pastor that's responsible for making sure that prayer needs are made known, and when there's the need for pastoral care that's related to the incident, this pastoral care provider, potentially church staff pastor, could provide that. And finally, a finances manager. And this isn't talking about the ability, the person managing finances is not necessarily talking about the ability to make decisions to commit thousands of dollars of the church's money to the event, but more in the idea of the finances having to do with the meeting of the team, where they meet their needs as the crisis is ongoing, you know, those kind of things. This person's keeping track of those kind of things. Is there a need for, you know, special cell phones, other things set up? This person's looking at the financial cost of all that. So ideally, you would have this 8-person team. Realistically, you could manage a crisis with the leader and four members of the team. So the 4 members in areas of more than one area of responsibility would be, you'd need a recorder and a secretary. You could have one person be the meeting facilitator and logistics person, and also finances. You could have the same person be the government liaison and the media spokesperson if necessary, and you could have the family liaison and the pastoral care provider, prayer person, as the same person. And again, it depends on the size of the church, the kind of people that make up your church, and so forth. But I think one of the key things to keep in mind here is that the bulk of these roles, well, as many as possible, should be occupied by members of the church. Although there's value in outside people, and certainly that's a component of managing a crisis, getting outside, objective, seasoned, experienced counsel. As far as the way the team manages the crisis, church members are ideal in those roles, because there's an anchor there. There's an existing relationship. There's a concern for the glory of God and the, in a sense, the reputation of the church, and clearly a love for the missionary. So all those things together make church members really good crisis management team members. All right, so the next thing I want to do is cover the some basic principles to keep in mind as you create a crisis management policy and a crisis management team. All right, so first of all, when the team is being constructed under the direction of the crisis management team director, there's certain qualities that you're looking for in the team members. And so let me just start from the top there. Number one, these crisis management team members should have the availability to gather together on extremely short notice. Okay, so in other words, if it's not something like a natural disaster that you can foresee coming, like a hurricane, if it's an event that's already happened or is imminent to happen within a couple of hours, your team members, as much as possible, need to be able to be available on extremely short notice, so that if they get a call, or whatever their job is, whatever time of the night or day it might be, they can get together within an hour or two. Okay, so that's, if somebody can't make that kind of commitment, if they can't be available on extremely short notice, it may not be wise to add them to the crisis management team. Also, they need to be able to, in a sense, prioritize and drop everything else that they're doing within reason and commit to the task at hand. And so, you know, in other words, this crisis could go on for a number of days, a number of weeks, actually could go on for, you know, a number of months. Sometimes, as you know, some of these missionary, especially the hostage type situations that take place, they can go on for a year or more than a year or so forth. You just never know. But the bottom line is especially in the beginning stages of the crisis, your team members need to be able to make this as high a priority as possible, and pretty much, you know, put everything else in the shadows. Still be a good steward of whatever their job is or whatever they're doing, but this becomes their highest priority. That's important. Also, and don't misunderstand or take this to an extreme, but they need to be people that are analytical at some degree and are capable of viewing a situation as unemotionally as possible. And the next point actually re-emphasizes that you don't want somebody that's dramatic. So basically, you want somebody who's you know, is able to analyze things, who's able to think clearly, and who's able to view a situation detached emotionally as much as possible. What are the facts? What are the time frames? What are the resources in hand? What just happened? What should a response be? What should that response look like? You know, if they're navigating by emotions where every new nugget of information flips them out, that's not somebody that you want in the crisis management team. You know, like for example, with the family liaison, and certainly with the pastor and prayer person for ministry to the family, obviously they need to be people that are very relational and are somewhat emotional, but they need to also be able to navigate in the midst of the other people being totally emotional and be able to bring some you know, some analysis and some encouragement and so forth. And obviously you don't want somebody that's dramatic. Now what we mean by that is there's certain people that are just wired to where every time there's a new nugget of information that comes in that's bad, they express that through sighs and through sobs and you know, eyebrow raising and throwing the hands up kind of thing. And you can't manage a crisis with team members that every nugget of information or potential disaster that might happen draws out of them this dramatic response. Okay, that's not helpful for them. It's certainly not helpful for the team, and even more so, it's not helpful for the family members to see the crisis management team members flipping out at every step of the way in the crisis. And I know this sounds blunt, but it's got to be said. These crisis management team members need to understand that people die. Someone could die because of this crisis, or somebody already has died. And as much as we pray for them, as much as we don't want that to happen, as much as we'll take every step so that you know, they're as safe as possible, what we want to do is make sure that we all understand that people actually do die. And I don't want to sound trite, and I don't want to just give out a quip, but there is something to keep in mind for the crisis management team members regarding this aspect that people actually have died or could die in this crisis. And there's an old quote attributed to Chrysostom where he basically says, in describing the Christian and suffering in this life and the stuff that can be done to Christians as part of persecution or whatever, that ultimately for the Christian, no matter what happens, there's no permanent damage. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but that is an incredible truth that we all need to wrap our minds around, especially the crisis management team. No matter how bad it gets, even if the person dies, there's no permanent damage done to the believer in Jesus. They've just stepped into a deeper relationship with the Lord out of this world and into His presence in a way that we're not in His presence right now. And so keep that in mind. Also, your crisis management team members should be people that are known to the leadership of the church and that have a reputation similar to what has already been described above. Okay, so in other words, almost like with the practical care team members and especially the missionary nurture team that I described last week, there's a lot to be said for people's reputation in the eyes of other church members. So if the church leadership or other members of the church would describe a potential crisis management team member the way that I've laid out in this slide, that may be a person that you really want to look at and consider. All right? So a couple other principles to keep in mind. The crisis management team director needs to ensure that neither he, the senior pastor, and I'm kind of, I'm kind of beating a dead horse here. I've already made this point, but I want to re-emphasize it. The director must ensure that neither he, the senior pastor, or any other person on the team except the assigned person speaks to the press or the government. Okay? So that's very important. Not even the director himself speaks to the press. There's a reason for that, which I'll unpack here in just a minute. Next, the crisis management team director has the right to not follow the advice provided by the team. So if the team, as a team, they're getting this information, they're planning out a response, whatever, and the counsel of the team, the advice of a lot of the team members is this, but the crisis management team director chooses to take that advice under advisement and do something else, he has the right to do that. He doesn't have to follow the advice provided by the team, but he's going to be held responsible for the consequences of not doing so, especially, obviously, if something goes sideways. In other words, in anywhere, in any part of life, especially with crises, the buck stops with somebody, and if that person's made the decision, they've received counsel, their decision is contrary to the counsel that they've received, they have the freedom to make it, but they've got to understand there are consequences if that decision proves to not turn out the way they expected. Now, here's another important point, and it has to do with the media and the government spokesman, for that matter, although it's more specific to the media spokesman. The media spokesman of the team is not an active decision maker with the team. The media spokesman will not be in on every meeting intentionally and will intentionally be kept in the dark regarding a lot of the details that led to the decisions that were made, and may even be kept in the dark regarding some decisions. The media spokesman will only pass on the information that the director of the team provides to him. No speculation and so forth, so that when the media spokesman is speaking to the media, and what do media do? They just drill you with questions. They're always probing. They're always looking around for some deeper nugget of information so they can get the scoop. The media spokesman only gives out the information that he's been given by the director, so that when he says that and now the media starts to probe, he can say, I don't know that. Honestly, I don't have the answer to that. I'm not privy to those decisions. I'm not privy to those details. I'm telling you, these are the facts that we can be made known at this time. So, you know, this media spokesman person needs to be aware of the reality of how the media operates, that they're always looking for an angle, they're looking for chinks in your armor, and they're always probing for more nuggets that'll give them a scoop. Okay, the media spokesman, and they have a responsibility to do that, and praise God for the media. I'm not anti-media. But the reality of it is, if the media spokesman is not in on all the decisions, on all the meetings, and is only speaking what the team tells them to speak by way of the director, then they can honestly say, hey, I don't have those facts, I don't have that information. As soon as I know something, I'll let you know. And that's an important truth to understand. All right, finally, let me go to the last slide here, and then I'm going to stitch this all together for you. Here are a few initial steps for creating a crisis management policy and team. If a church is ready to move forward in this area, here are some things that you can do. The church leadership, either the senior pastor or the board, should assign either the church missions pastor or the missions director or a missions board member, maybe the committee chairman of the missions committee, some key person in a key role in the church that hopefully overlaps into the missions realm at some degree, should be given the responsibility to research this important subject. There's a lot of information available on the net. There's a lot of information that's available through the more traditional missions agencies, which is where we learn a lot of our things from in this specific subject. And in fact, as a ministry, Shepherd's Hat, because this is a new area, the whole idea of crisis management policy and teams for missionaries as part of a local church rather than just an agency. A lot of what we've done is we've learned from New Tribes, we've learned from the IMB, we've learned from Pioneers, from Samaritan's Purse. Our manager of ministry security and stewardship is retired law enforcement for 30 years, and so he's attending meetings with all of the other major missions organizations and working with their security people, stays alert of what's going on. And then what he's done and what we've done as a ministry is to kind of sift through what's available out there and kind of condense it down and put it into a local church context. So this person, the church leadership should assign this person to research the subject, and there's a lot that's available on the net. Once that's done, then a proposal should be given to the church leadership about the need for and the value of a crisis management policy and team. So obviously this guy's doing the research. He's come to some conclusions that we need this if we're going to venture into this realm of sending our own missionaries direct, and he presents a proposal to the church leadership on the need for this and the value of it. And then once he's approved, you know, what this guy is going to do, and if he's not a church staff member, he may end up being in the role of the crisis management team director, but if it's not going to be him, once he's approved by the board, he's going to assign a key person to attend. We highly recommend that somebody, either this person that's done the research or the potential crisis management team director, attend a crisis management policy training. And there are 3 organizations that do this training. Our organization, Shepherd Staff, is familiar with all of these. Personally, I've been through the crisis management policy training of what I have written down there, Crisis Consulting International. The website is there, cricon.org. Also, our executive director and our ministry security manager have attended the Fort Sherman Academy crisis management policy training put on by them. And there's a fairly new crisis response organization within the Christian world called Concilium, and you can get their website there, this slide. So the idea being that, you know, as a flow here, this person who's done the research, put the proposal together, gotten approval to move forward with establishing this, either that person or maybe even the potential crisis management team director and that person would go and actually attend this training. Most of these trainings are 2 to 3 days. Fort Sherman Academy's training is done up in Idaho. I actually attended the Crisis Consulting International training at SIL headquarters outside of Dallas more than 10 years ago. I'm not sure where Consilium does it, but the basic idea would be that the crisis management team director would attend this training, assimilate all the information, learn the stuff, build the bridges of relationship with these organizations, which may help downstream, then come back into the church and then develop the policy, which then is going to provide the tracks that the crisis management component of the ministry is going to go down if a crisis event happens in the life of a missionary. And so let me give a last couple thoughts, and then we'll open it up to questions. One thing that I learned is when I started to go and actually look into this, it was so scary that it's like that there are times when you just realize, wait a minute, why are we even doing this? Why not just default and send them out through agencies like we've always done, because they got all this down. And if you kind of come at it from that angle, when you're overwhelmed by all this stuff, then basically, you know, you never will actually send your own and have the blessing of sending direct, the reciprocal blessing that goes with sending your own direct to the field. And there are great, I mean, you can really send and care for your own people through one of the major and traditional agencies, but there are amazing blessings to be had when you send your own direct. Also, you have to recognize that in this area, America is a culture that's sue happy. We are lawsuit, we love lawsuits. And so, although there's always the reality of a potential lawsuit, if a crisis event happens by a family member or whatever, again, if you're going to navigate by what might happen, then it's better to not send direct. But if you're willing to say, hey, we're going to do this to the best of our ability, we've done our due diligence to prepare for every event, if a lawsuit happens, then it happens and God will guide you through that. There is also, there are insurance companies. You can sculpt a lot of crisis management type insurance policies for just what you need. So I want to just leave it, I think, right there, and now open it up to see if there might be any questions. And again, I want to confess, I'm not an expert in this area. The whole idea of churches doing this at the local church level is new. So I'll provide the best answers that I can, but I may refer you to other people that know a lot more about the subject than I do.
Thank you, Jeff. As always, really great information. A couple of people have asked for the slides. We will send you these slides. Don Paul and Catherine Nober, I believe is the name. 2 requests for the slides. Anyone who wants the slides, if you'll just go ahead and type that in the question and answer panel box, we'll get an alert and we will definitely send you the slides. And also a reminder that you can listen to this exact presentation at 1615.org in the next couple of weeks. So again, let me remind you, if you want to talk to Jeff directly or you have a question for him, as he said, he might defer you to someone else, but now is your time. I'm going to let that section populate there. So if you have questions for Jeff, please add them. Jeff, I do have a question. You mentioned insurance, and I don't know where you were going with this, but one of my questions is regarding the liability that would be placed upon the director specifically of the team and the other team members as well. Is there a insurance company that you know that would provide some type of director's insurance? You know, if the decisions were made, again, with prayer and wisdom and all those things, but they turned out not in a positive way, at least from our human perspective, I would think there could be some liability on this team. Do you have any information about that?
Well, I actually don't have the information myself, but our executive director has done a lot of research on this subject. There are a number of insurance organizations that will cover, I mean, it's pretty standard practice for the board of directors of a corporation to have board of director insurance coverage, so they're not held personally liable if the organization is sued. So it's kind of in that frame of insurance, but it's specific to overseas and crisis type events. So there is insurance like that available. I don't have the details on that. I would recommend that they contact Shepherd staff and specifically ask for our executive director, Ron Clipp. And one of the things, Matt, which I'm sure you know and all of our listeners know, is that, yeah, even with insurance, even if you've done nothing wrong, America is structured in such a way that somebody can sue you for any reason at any time, regardless of your connection to something that took place. It's a crazy system that we live within. So again, recognizing that insurance is important, and there are insurance policies for crisis, overseas crises for missionaries, and again, Ron can give the information on those, but policies that actually would cover not just the board, the crisis management team, and the board of the church, but policies that would also cover hiring the hostage negotiator, insurance that would cover that evacuation of the missionary out of the country. And there are even policies, although we don't recommend this, there are policies that you can get would actually pay a certain amount of ransom for missionaries that have been, abducted and they're being held for ransom. We don't recommend that. No missions organization recommends that ransom be paid for a missionary, because obviously once you do it for one missionary, all missionaries are targets. But there are policies that will provide ransom.
Right. Jeff, any examples of, I know this is new, but one of the questions here, any examples of these actually functioning and working? Have you been able to train any of these up?
Actually, we haven't actually, been able to set one of these up that's actually has functioned. Now, the people at Fort Sherman Academy and Crisis Consulting International, they have actually a track record of churches that have taken this seriously, and they can actually probably refer you to some churches that have taken on this role and responsibility already. One other thing I should say, though, is that there are some similarities between, crisis events that happen here, like a shooter at a church service. That's happened somewhat regularly here in our country. So there are actually churches that have developed crisis management policy and teams to handle events that actually happen in the church here. And there's a lot of overlap in principles that they navigate by that can help with this also.
Right, that's great. This question's for me, Jeff. Does this team relate to the missionary nurture team, the previous two teams you've discussed? Is there any interaction between those two?
Because this team, in a sense, is only called into action when there's a crisis. There wouldn't be a lot of interaction between the two teams. And the thing about the missionary nurture team is that, those folks are in an ongoing relational, emotional, sort of meaningful relationship connection with the missionaries. And although the crisis management team members might know the people that are engaged at that level with missionaries, in some senses it might be actually more beneficial for the crisis management team members to not know the people or not know what's going on with the missionaries at as deep a level as the nurture team providers have, or at that level, because when the crisis comes, again, there's that great need for objective thinking and decision making, somewhat attached from the emotional condition that the person's in.
Right. That answers my next question. I was going to say, could they serve on both teams? And I think you're discouraging that, and that makes a lot of sense.
I don't think that would be wise, no.
So, Jeff, I'm going to ask, I want to remind you all, this is your opportunity to talk to Jeff. I've got a lot of requests for the slides. They're probably absorbing it. But if you have a question for Jeff, now's your opportunity. But I'm going to bring one up, Jeff, while I'm waiting for a question to be asked.
Okay.
This is really more of a philosophical question. I know this stuff is very practical. Of course, it has spiritual implications. But at the Lausanne conference, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years ago or more, one of the speakers said that the lack of gospel progress in the missions world among Muslims may be owing to a lack of missionary models, missionary martyr models. And I know, again, this is a judgment call. It's a philosophy thing. But what's your perspective on that? I know whenever there's danger or difficulty, I think our first response is evacuation, protect our own. But talk about, paying the ultimate price. And again, not a hero complex or anything like that, but
Yeah.
you understand what I'm
Yeah.
saying here? This is a tough question.
I absolutely do, and it's good that you bring it up, Matt, because one component of this crisis management policy should be even what we talked about last week, a theology of risk or a theology of danger. And so, yeah, I mean, if we have eternity in mind, and our greatest goal is God's glory among people that don't know Him right now, and their greatest need is to come to know Him. The reality of it is He's worthy for missionaries to die for His glory. And we honestly, good stewardship says we take every precaution to keep the missionary as safe as possible. But the reality of it is that there's sometimes where you can't make decision based on the safety of the missionary as your ultimate goal.
Mm-hmm.
The glory of God is your ultimate goal. The expansion of His kingdom, the mission, you might say, takes a greater priority than the safety of the individual. And I want to, you kind of prime my pump on that, Matt. I want to share this. I'm going to make this very brief. But I have a good friend who was a Navy doctor, and during her career, she served on shore at Navy hospitals around the country. Her last year and a half, she had to do sea duty, and she said that one of her greatest, one of the most difficult things for her to do was to make that transition from working in a hospital, where the highest goal of the Navy doctor is to make sure that the sailors that they serve are as healthy as possible. When you go on a ship, you're told that's not your greatest goal. The mission of the ship is a higher priority than the health of any of the sailors that are on that ship. So, doctor, you have to rethink what your purpose is as a doctor when you serve on a ship, so that when sailors come to you, your goal isn't to get them 100% healthy. Your goal is to get them as healthy as possible for them to do their job to complete the mission. And I think in that there's a great analogy for expanding the kingdom, across the nations, and the great costs involved in doing that. And to speak specifically to your incident, there are times when evacuation may not be the most wise thing to do, rather than to just preserve the people's safety. It may be that they choose to stay there, and you permit them to stay there, and it costs them their lives, because they're navigating from what Chrysostom says, the reality that there's no permanent damage to them. Right. So it's tricky stuff. It is philosophical. It's theological. But when you're going into global missions into the world as it is today, you got to have this stuff thought through and then navigate according to it.
Right. And, I'm not trying to be insensitive or indifferent. I mean, I've never personally been in a situation like this. And if you had a family member on the field whose life was at risk, I'm sure the anxiety is incredible. But thinking of Tertullian, similar to Chrysostom, he said that the blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church. And, if we look at church history, we see that the church grew incredibly when people loved the gospel and Jesus so much that they would die for him. And again, this is a very touchy subject, but we are to love the gospel more than our own lives. And I think our tendency is just to leave, to evacuate. And sometimes that may not be the most spiritual thing, if you will, to do. It's the most pragmatic thing to do. But
yes.
Even today, I mean, look at the growth of the church is often because of the testimony of those who are suffering, because they see the suffering and they see the unshakable joy, and they say, well, I want what those people have. So I'm glad that came up. I've got a couple of questions here, Jeffrey, that I want to get to.
Okay.
I'm committed, this is from Don Hall, I'm committed to the local church as the lead entity in the missionary care team, sending, supporting agencies. But this area appears to recommend partnering with an agency, especially in the case of the small to mid-sized church. This would also free the church to concentrate on PCTs, which we talked about, and MNTs, missionary nurture teams, for those of you who weren't tuning in last week. Of course, the training for local church crisis management would be worth the investment. I would like to get in touch with you regarding my MDiv thesis on the local church. Oh, it's more of a comment. So Jeff, Don Hall would like you to contact him
Okay.
about crisis management and investment. So Don, I'm sure he's going to get in touch with you, and I've got information there. So I'm going to give one more opportunity for you to anyone out there to ask Jeff a question. And if not, I am going to wind us down here. Again, Jeff, thank you very much for your information you're sharing with us. Let me let you know about a few upcoming events. The mission table is available online, all of the episodes, and we have a brand new episode that's airing on November the 3rd, 2015. We had such an incredible response to our first episode of Is Everyone a Missionary that we are going to do a second module. So if you didn't tune in for that, we had 1,000 people tune in for that original topic. And if you're not familiar with the mission table, let me recommend that you go to themissiontable.org. It's an interactive conversation between various missions leaders tackling controversial and provocative missions topics, and really excited. Jeff's going to be one of our table guests next season for those episodes. And let you know about a few upcoming webinars. On November the 11th, we have a webinar on Buddhism, 1 billion people hidden from the gospel, outside currently the reach of the gospel. So if you're working in a Buddhist context, let me recommend that you tune in for that. It should be really great. Jeff, I'm going to leave your slide up there, so if anyone wants to contact you, I know there's several people that had questions directly for you, and they can reach you. So I'm going to leave that up. Okay. So again, thank you so much, Jeff, for your time. Let me thank our live audience. Let me remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded, will be available for download in the very near future, probably just a week. We say 2 weeks just to be safe, but at 1615.org, again, 1615.org. For all of you who requested the slides, we will be sending those to you in the next day or two. Thank you again, Jeff. Thanks for our live audience. I'm Matthew Ellison for 1615 signing off.